She was an empress on screen and a true titan of European cinema. An icon of impossible beauty and profound talent. Her name was Romy Schneider, and for millions, she was the ultimate star, a fairy tale princess who grew into a legendary actress. But behind the dazzling lights and adoring crowds, Romy Schneider's life was one of staggering turmoil, marked by relentless pressure, public betrayals, and private sorrows so deep they seemed insurmountable. The world watched her every move, from her meteoric rise to her heart-wrenching tragedies. Then, on May 29, 1982, at just 43 years old, Romy Schneider was found dead in her Paris apartment. It left behind a legacy of cinematic brilliance and a storm of unanswered questions. The story of her death quickly became a fixed narrative, a heartbroken mother, consumed by grief, who had finally succumbed to her pain. Theories of suicide swirled, painting a portrait of a fragile star who chose to end her suffering. For decades, this has been the story the world thinks it knows. But what if that isn't the whole truth? What if the official reports and sensational headlines missed the most crucial part of the story? What if the one person who witnessed her final, turbulent years, her husband, the man who stood by her side, Daniel Biasini, has been holding on to a different story this whole time? Now, after more than 40 years of near-total silence, the heartbreaking final chapter of Romy Schneider's life is being revealed through his eyes. And his account changes everything you thought you knew about the tragic end of a cinematic queen. To understand the tragedy of Romy's end, you have to go back to the beginning, to a fairy tale that quickly became a prison. Born Rosemary Magdalena Albach in Vienna in 1938, she was acting royalty from birth, the daughter of celebrated actors Magda Schneider and Wolf Albach-Reddy. It was her mother, Magda, a formidable stage mom whose own career had stalled, who saw her daughter as a path back to the limelight. She pushed young Romy, barely a teenager, in front of the cameras, orchestrating her career with an iron will. And the camera loved her. At just 16, Romy was cast as Empress Elizabeth of Austria in the wildly popular Sisai trilogy. The films were a global phenomenon. They transformed her into the darling of Europe, a symbol of innocence and romance. To the public, she was Sisai. But for Romy, the role felt like a gilded cage. She was trapped by the very image that made her a star, a candy-floss persona that didn't match the complex, intelligent woman she was becoming. Her life was completely controlled. Her mother and stepfather managed her career, her money, and her public life, pushing her into sequels and roles that just reinforced the Sisai image she was desperate to escape. She yearned for artistic freedom, for challenging roles that would prove her talent. She believed her salvation was in France. In 1958, her life changed forever on the set of the movie Christine. She was cast opposite a charismatic, brooding, and impossibly handsome French actor named Alain Delon. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, and it exploded into a passionate, real-life love affair. For Romy, Delon was more than a lover, he was her escape. She defied her family, broke her German film contracts, and followed him to Paris, leaving the world of Sisai behind for good. It was a brilliant career move. In France, she was finally taken seriously. She worked with the greatest directors of the era, from Luchino Visconti to Orson Welles, transforming herself from a German Swiss. David. The professional relationship soon blossomed into love. Romy saw a stability in Daniel that she craved. They married in December 1975, and in 1977, their daughter Sarah was born. Romy threw herself into family life, cherishing the simple, domestic moments. Biasini later recalled how she loved ordinary things, walking barefoot in the garden, spending Sundays with his parents, just being a mother and a wife. It was a brief, sunlit period of happiness. But tragedy was a relentless stalker. In 1979, her first husband, Harry Mahan, took his own life. The news devastated Romy, filling her with guilt and sorrow. Then came another private pain, a miscarriage of a child she was expecting with Biasini. She was fighting on multiple fronts. The German press, which never forgave her for leaving for France, was relentlessly hostile. Paparazzi pursued her with monstrous fervor. She was also embroiled in a terrifying battle with French tax authorities, who were demanding a ruinous amount of money. Through it all, her second marriage was straining under the pressure. By early 1981, she and Daniel Biasini had separated. Romy was a woman besieged. She was battling addiction, using alcohol and pills to numb the constant pain, which led her to a detox clinic in the spring of 1981. Unknown to the public, she was also recovering from a serious kidney operation that left her physically weakened. Life had already dealt her a series of blows that would have broken most people. But Romy was a fighter. She was a devoted mother and a brilliant actress, determined to keep going. She had no way of knowing that the universe was preparing to deliver its final, most unthinkable blow. July 5, 1981. It was a warm summer day that would end as the single most catastrophic moment in Romy Schneider's life. Her beloved son, David, was just 14 years old. Following his mother's separation from Daniel Biasini, David was staying at the home of Biasini's parents in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a place where felt loved and comfortable. That afternoon, David returned to the house and found the gate locked. Like any athletic teenager, he decided not to wait. He started to climb the tall, spiked metal fence surrounding the property. But this time, something went horribly wrong. He slipped. In one horrifying instant, a carefree moment turned into a nightmare. David fell and was impaled on the sharp steel spikes of the fence, one of which punctured his femoral artery. Daniel Biasini was one of the first to find him. He would later describe it as the single worst experience of his life. He saw the boy he had helped raise, the boy he loved like a son, lying there, his life draining away. Biasini held the dying boy and rode with him in the ambulance, a desperate journey to the hospital. He stayed with David all the way to the doors of the operating room. But the damage was too severe. The blood loss was too great. David was gone. When Romy received the news, she let out a sound that Biasini said he would never forget, a shrill, desperate cry, the most terrible cry he had ever heard. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. The tragedy was absolute, but the cruelty wasn't over. As Romy navigated her grief, the paparazzi descended like vultures. In a move that is still shocking today, one photographer disguised himself as a medical worker to get into the hospital morgue and take photographs of Romy's dead son. The grotesque images were eventually published, turning a private agony into a public spectacle. David's death was the point of no return. It was the wound from which she would never recover. She continued to work, channeling her anguish into her final film, La Passante du Sans Souci, where she plays a woman protecting a young boy who reminds her of her own son. The performance is almost unbearable to watch, a raw, haunting portrait of grief. Felt friends said that after David died, something inside her broke permanently. The light in her eyes dimmed. Daniel Biasini would later state that from that day forward, Romy was alive, but she was no longer truly living. She was a ghost, adrift in an ocean of sorrow. For 40 years, the narrative around Romy Schneider's death has been simple: she died of a broken heart, or she took her own life. The public and the press accepted that her death was, in essence, a suicide, whether deliberate or accidental. The discovery of alcohol and medication in her apartment only fueled this speculation. But one man who was there, who saw the scene in her Paris apartment that morning, has always held a different truth. For decades, Daniel Biasini remained largely silent. He raised their daughter, Sarah, far from the spotlight, fiercely protecting Romy's memory by refusing to engage with the gossip. He watched as books and films portrayed Romy as a tragic, unstable caricature, a distortion he couldn't stand. Now, after 4 decades, his account provides the final, crucial perspective. And his most emphatic statement cuts through all the rumors. Daniel Biasini has made it clear, Romy Schneider did not commit suicide. She did not kill herself, he has stated firmly. When he arrived at her apartment on May 29, 1982, he saw no evidence of suicide, no overdose, no violence, nothing to suggest a deliberate act. So, what does he believe happened? His explanation is both simpler and infinitely more profound. He says Romy had given up internally. In another interview, he put it even more starkly: sorrow killed her. He believes her heart, quite literally, could no longer withstand the weight of her grief. I think it was the heart that simply couldn't take it anymore, he explained. From his perspective, the 10 months after David's death weren't a slow-motion suicide, but the gradual, unstoppable shutdown of a body whose soul had already departed. He described her as alive, but not really living anymore. The pain of losing David was an endless pain, an endless sadness, from which there was no recovery. Biasini's account reframes Romy's final chapter. He asks the world to look beyond the image of the unstable, alcoholic, depressed star. He speaks of the woman who loved simple things, a devoted mother whose great passions were her children and her work. He recalls their forbidden love, the happiness they found together, and the joy of their daughter Sarah's birth, a ray of light in a life full of shadows. His testimony isn't from a distant observer. He was the man she divorced, yet their lives remained intertwined. It was at his parents' home that David died. It was he who held the boy in his arms. By flatly denying the suicide narrative, Biasini seeks to restore a measure of dignity to Romy's memory. He argues that to frame her death as a choice is to misunderstand the absolute nature of her grief. It wasn't a decision, it was an inevitability. Her body simply could not continue to house a spirit so completely broken. The night before she died, Romy gave no indication her end was near. On the evening of May 28, 1982, she had a pleasant dinner with her new partner, Laurent Petain, and his brother. She was reportedly in good spirits, even discussing a new film project. After her friends left, Romy sat down at her desk in her apartment on the Rue Barbet de Joly to write a letter. It was a simple, quiet act that would be her last. Sometime in those silent, early morning hours, her body finally surrendered. She was found the next morning by her partner, slumped over her desk, a pen having fallen from her hand. The examining magistrate, Laurent Devinas, was called to the scene. He found no evidence of trauma or violence. After the lead physician declared her death was from natural causes, Devinas made a crucial decision. In a final act of compassion to spare her further violation from the press, he ordered that no autopsy be performed. He famously wrote, "Do not dissect her." While born of respect, this decision inadvertently left the door open for decades of speculation. Without a definitive forensic analysis, the rumors of a fatal overdose could never be completely silenced, even though the official cause of death was ruled cardiac arrest. This is where Daniel Biasini's testimony provides the final, emotional piece of the puzzle. The official cause was cardiac arrest, a failed heart. Biasini's belief is that sorrow had simply stopped her heart. The two statements, one medical and one emotional, aren't contradictory. They're two sides of the same tragic coin. They tell the story of a heart that was not only metaphorically broken, but physically exhausted, a heart that had beaten through so much pain that it simply couldn't beat anymore. Maybe the real question isn't what killed Romy Schneider, but how she managed to survive for as long as she did. The story of Romy Schneider is one of breathtaking talent and unbearable sorrow. For decades, the myth of her death threatened to overshadow the brilliance of her life, reducing her to a one-dimensional tragic figure. But the perspective offered by her husband, Daniel Biasini, reframes that narrative. It replaces the sensationalism of suicide with a more profound truth, that of a mother's boundless grief. His account defends her memory, reminding us of the strong, loving woman who was savaged by fate. Her legacy endures, not just in her powerful performances, but in the cautionary tale of the human cost of fame. Her daughter, Sarah Biasini, has grown up to become an actress and author, exploring her relationship with her mother's myth in her beautiful book, La Beauté du Ciel, The Beauty of the Sky. Through her, and through the love of those who truly knew her, the real Romy Schneider lives on.